Coming full circle, we've trekked through the east wing of the mansion, up to the second floor, and back to the entrance. Barry's already here, waiting for us. There's something a little off about him, even if he hasn't given us any real reason to be suspicious yet. But as we come to find out more about the fate of Bravo Team, the stakes are raised for the survivors, and while only hinted at so far, things aren't what they seem in this already intense and bizarre situation. This is part 7 of Overthinking Resident Evil. We wrapped up the last episode with Jill moving through the U-shaped corridor and back out onto the second floor of the entrance hall, back where we started. Here, she runs into Barry.
Barry!
Jill, what's going on? Any clues?
No, but something's wrong with this house.
Whoa, this hall is dangerous. Maybe it's better to secure our escape route first. There must be a back door somewhere. Let's try to find it first, shall we?
Okay, let's separate again.
Just a moment. I found something.
What is it?
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things. Better take it with you.
But how about you, Barry?
I have this.
Thank you. I'll take this then.
As always, I'm not going to make fun of the dialogue. Seems pretty innocuous, if a bit odd, and you can be forgiven for not giving it much thought. But there's more to this scene than meets the eye. First thing I want to touch on is how Barry, not so subtly, tries to direct the player towards the back entrance. In doing so, he's tipping the player off as to the main objective of their time in the mansion, finding the 4 crests that open the door to the shed. We actually passed the back door in episode 5, but I didn't go into it there because I want to save it for later. We passed a room with a crest in it too, not far from that same door. Point being, there's a chance the player may have already found the exit, but if not, now you know where to look. Something else Barry tries to do is get Jill to leave the entrance hall. He claims the hall, one of the safest places in the mansion, is dangerous. I've been giving this some thought, and at this point in the game, there aren't a lot of obvious reasons why he'd want that. I could make the argument that it's just reinforcing the direction towards the back door, but that feels a little lazy on my part. I have a theory though. I think the real reason is less about gameplay and more to do with narrative. It's something I want to hold off on for just a little while longer, but it has to do with the weapon he gives to Jill. It's worth noting that there's an almost identical version of this cutscene if you re-enter the hall from the first floor. So to reiterate, Barry gives us the acid rounds, doesn't bother telling us where he got it, tries to get Jill to leave the hall for some reason, and asks her to try and find an exit, likely some kind of back entrance. Keep all of that in mind as we continue. We had a pretty good look at the entrance hall in the second episode, but we never bothered to check upstairs. Right from the get-go, it's available to you, but given the open nature of the game, I didn't want to spread the focus of the series too thin from the outset, so I never went into the second floor. There isn't a whole lot to say about the visuals that hasn't been said already. It looks just like the lower floor, though the floor here is entirely covered in red carpet, and the walkways are lined by dark wooden banisters. There's not as much open space up here, but there doesn't need to be, as there aren't any enemies to worry about. Like the first floor, the camera angles stick to wide shots that both convey scale and the illusion of control and security. All the camera angles are from above looking down, and to me, they're all a bit more creative and interesting than the first floor. A little tighter too. This one in particular is really cool to me. I know it's not deliberate, but it reminds me of that iconic scene from The Shining. In the back corners are 2 portraits. I did my best, but I couldn't figure out what they were. The one on the left could be a flipped, high contrast and edited Mona Lisa, but I'm not confident making that claim at all. The one on the right, I have no idea. There's a stained glass window at the landing, but I couldn't get a good look at that either, so let's just leave it. Up here, there are 3 doors available. All 3 are open to you from the get-go. We just exited the U-shaped corridor, so that leaves 2. One on the west side, one on the east. We'll be saving the west door for next episode. The east door, closest to the one we just came out of, holds one of the most memorable scenes in the game, right up there with that first zombie encounter. There are 2 things that I seem to say a lot in this series that I'm gonna have to say again. First, I don't know why, but I have such a soft spot for this room. Second, unfortunately, this is yet another room that the remake does better. With that out of the way, let's take a look at this forgettable, but still kind of awesome, little room. It's a cramped hallway leading onto the terrace. It has almost the exact same visual design as the adjacent entrance hall. Same walls, skirting boards, light fixtures, with only the floor being different. I absolutely love how this room unfolds because as it's almost shot like a movie. Think of each angle as a thumbnail sketch in a storyboard, and you can see what I mean. We start here. It's a well-composed shot, but one of the more boring shots in the game, and not worth dwelling on. There's no environmental detail and nothing we can inspect. There's a small key for Chris, but that's all. To me, the most interesting part of this is simply how it obscures the rest of the hallway and forces the player to walk blind into danger, something we've talked about many times before. I do want you to take a quick note of the general shape of it all though, how the camera's up high and it's all slanted to the right. This room gets really interesting in this second shot. Waist high, looking down the corridor. A dark room with a light at the end. The key focal point is the blood on the floor, leading towards the far door. When you enter this second shot, the player character partially obscures your view of the blood, tipping you off that something's not quite right, while not letting you get a full look at the picture. I don't know if it's intentional, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is either. I want to quickly detour and talk about the 180 rule. It's a basic filmmaking technique, most notably put to use during dialogue scenes, but is frequently used throughout this game too. Picture a scene of two people talking. When the dialogue is portrayed through standard shot reverse shot, there's an imaginary line bisecting the subjects that the camera won't cross, meaning it has a full 180-degree arc to work with. This is done to make the scene visually easier to follow, and is one of those things that you don't really notice until it's broken, often referred to as crossing the line. I'm bringing it up here because this transition is a perfect example of how the game gives the player zero control over the camera, but is never disorienting. You can inspect the blood here and on the wall, and while Chris and Jill don't have much insight into the situation, their worries are very justified. Coming into the third angle, the bright light only makes the blood stand out more. But the most interesting thing about this angle to me is how it's almost a mirror image of the first one. It's tighter on the subject and a slightly more downward angle, but the intention's there. The huge smear of blood on the wall is on full display now, and is the clear focus of the shot. But again, Chris and Jill don't give us much to work with. These three shots, in the order they're presented, they tell a story. First shot, very little lead room, with foreboding music setting the tone. Second shot reveals the blood. It's higher contrast, and with a slight lower angle to enhance the feeling of vulnerability as the player walks further away and into danger. And finally, the last shot has the largest blood stain front and center and in the spotlight, as the camera's tighter on the player and at a gnarlier angle. I might sound a bit over-enthusiastic here, but I really do think it's beautiful. Like, this room's so unimportant that it doesn't even get its own page on the wiki, and yet it's still crafted with so much care. I first played the remake, and had beaten it several times over before playing the original, so I went into this section knowing full well what I was getting into. But back in '96, for those people playing this for the first time, this must have filled them with so much dread. Whoever, or whatever, left the trail of blood is on the other side of that door, and you're gonna have to pass through it. We've already spent too much time in here, but there is one last thing I want to touch on before we head out. I think there's a second purpose to this room: pacing. In the remake, the door from the entrance hall opens straight out onto the terrace, which has been extended and is a whole new thing in and of itself. But here, there's an extra door between entrance hall and terrace. Being a video game, and specifically a relatively open video game made for the PS1, there's a huge degree of cinematic and narrative control that had to be sacrificed to give the gameplay room to breathe. So as we've seen and discussed in earlier episodes, the developers had to get creative with how they could organically direct the player's attention and actions without forcing it upon them. The northeast corridor gave players the chance to catch their breath, and built tension for the next big scare without players knowing. The tea room used clever camera angles to hide scares and create dread by giving players this feeling of losing control. It's a little thing, but this liminal space does quite a lot to control the pacing of the situation. It gives the player a beat between entrance hall and terrace, and uses the blood to create tension. Again, letting the player's imagination take one environmental detail and run wild with the possibilities. Before we explore the east terrace, let's just watch one way this next scene can play out. That was Forrest Speyer, a member of Bravo team and a friend of our protagonists. Chris in particular was quite close to Forrest. To be frank, the game doesn't do the best job of portraying the horror of the situation. After finding two of their friends, Edward Dewey and Kenneth J. Sullivan, horrifically murdered, and losing Joseph Frost in between, it must have been difficult for them to hold out hope for the other members of Bravo team. Yet, a part of me believes that is exactly what Chris, Jill, and likely Barry did. Hold out hope. Finding Forrest, having met such a gruesome, painful end, was just one more friend they were too late to save. This is something a lot of fiction doesn't get right, and I understand it's not the easiest thing to convey, but just imagine for a second that you found one of your closest friends dead. Now imagine another, then another. In the space of maybe an hour, you've just discovered 3 of your favorite people's last moments on Earth were horrific and painful. There aren't really words for it, and that's what's at stake in Resident Evil. It's not just that our surviving heroes are desperately trying to escape. It's not just the gradual uncovering of an evil corporation's secret experiments, or the betrayal of someone close to them. It's this desperate and vain attempt at saving as many of their friends as they can. In this way, the original Resident Evil is more like a classic horror film than any of the games that came after it. In fact, before we continue, I want to detour again. One huge mistake I feel I've made with the earlier episodes is that I didn't give the deaths of our teammates the gravity they deserved. So real quick, I want to rectify that and spend a minute or two talking about who our fallen teammates were and what they meant to Chris, Jill, Rebecca, Brad, and Barry. The first victim we come across is that of Edward Dewey, Bravo Team's chopper pilot. This one's a bit weird, and I want to get this out of the way before we talk about Edward. He's mentioned in the instruction manual for the original Resident Evil, but not given a bio like the others, and I can't find any info on him that predates either the remake or Resident Evil 0. Point is, I'm not entirely sure anything I have to say was canon back in 1996. At any rate, his role in Bravo Team was originally their pilot, but was also rear security, which I assume is like the opposite of point man. In RE0, he wasn't the chopper pilot, but actually served as co-pilot for Kevin Dooley, a new addition. So my guess is, like Chris Redfield, he wasn't the pilot in any official sense, but was simply qualified to do so when the need arose. Edward Dewey's development history is interesting in that he was originally one of the 4 main characters planned during early development, sort of. The Edward Dewey we got was quite different from the character he sprung from, but that's something we'll talk about another time, I think. He's been described as a tall man who liked to dance. I'm sure he was a cool dude, and I think it's a shame we didn't get to see more of him. This was partially rectified in RE0, where he was confirmed to be the first canonical STARS person to drop, and better portrayed in the Nintendo 64 beta footage, but we don't talk about RE0 here. Joseph Frost, the only member of Alpha Team to die during the events of the game, was also Alpha Team's newest recruit. He was bumped up from Bravo Team by Wesker himself. I've gone into that a bit in the first episode already, so I won't bore you with my theories as to why. Bumped up isn't strictly the right phrase to use either, as Alpha wasn't superior to Bravo, but it says he was promoted in the manual, so there you go. He was the team's vehicle specialist, but like most STARS team members, had various other qualifications, such as being a weapons specialist and qualified to handle hazardous materials. With Forrest being Bravo Team's vehicle specialist, it's likely those two work together often, even after Joseph's promotion. Apparently Joseph, Forrest, and Chris were pretty tight, and would occasionally hit the town together. I can't find the source for that, but it's on the wiki, so take it as you will. He was described as curious and energetic, with a great sense of humor, and it's a shame we didn't get to see more of him. This is a personal gripe of mine, but with Edward showing up in RE0, Joseph's the only one not to get an in-game model, and is only seen in the live-action intro. Kenneth J. Sullivan's memory will always be overshadowed by his introduction, it being one of the most iconic moments in the entire franchise and all. But he was a quiet man, serving Bravo Team as point man and scout, with an expert knowledge of chemistry. He was described as a gentleman, whose hobbies included dog training and landscaping. Combine this with his knowledge of chemistry and role as point man, and you could see how, in another time, he might have been the best person to have on your side throughout the Spencer Mansion. Think a more mature Chris Redfield with a more relevant skill set. It's entirely possible that, as scout, he made it to the mansion before anyone else, and could possibly have had a hand in things being the way they were when Alpha Team arrived. Total speculation on my part, but who knows how much of Alpha Team's path through the mansion was first paved by Kenneth. He was the oldest member of STARS and was handpicked by Wesker himself. I can't see any interpersonal relationships he might have had with the other members, but I'd say it's fair to assume he was well liked by all. And finally, back to Forrest. Forrest Speyer was an Omni-Man and vehicle specialist, the Bravo analog to Joseph. I've mentioned Forrest, Joseph, and Chris's relationship already, but with that in mind, it's easy to see why those guys might have gelled so well. While not his role in the team, Forrest was also a skilled sniper and sharpshooter, rivaling Chris for best marksman in the team. And like Chris, Forrest came to STARS by way of the military. Chris and Forrest were also best friends, which adds to the gravity of his unfortunate death. Apparently Forrest was maintenance specialist and some kind of cybersecurity expert too, though that feels like stuff that was added during Zero. Because we get almost no time with Bravo Team, their deaths don't have that emotional gut punch that they should, but the characters themselves, Jill and Chris, Barry, and especially Rebecca, would take it pretty hard. I'm glad I got that out of the way. I just wish I had been smart enough to talk about Joseph, Edward, and Kenneth when it was more appropriate. Thank you for putting up with my little detour. Now back to the East Terrace. Let's take a quick look at the actual East Terrace before we continue with Forrest and the rest of the video. Yes, I know this video is structured terribly. The terrace is a strange area. It's spacious and completely undercover. There's only one chair by the table in this first shot, but move further down and you can see another chair, overturned in the corner. A simple visual cue communicating some kind of struggle, likely knocked over by Forrest on his way out. I dig the vines and I dig the view, but in terms of environment, I don't really have anything to say. Like a few areas in the original Resident Evil, it's wasted potential. And once again, this is another area that is so much better in the remake. Camera angles are wide shots, but not super wide by the standard set before it, and aside from the final shot, are all fairly level. What I love most about the camera work here is how it serves as a continuation of the story that began in the previous room. We get a similar 3-shot sequence here. The first is centered on the player, with nothing in the environment tipping us off that anything is wrong. Same as the last room. Second shot shows the overturned chair. Not a dead giveaway, but something keen eyes will pick up on and interpret as hinting at an earlier conflict. And finally, the third shot reveals the goods. The sequence builds suspense before showing us Forrest, and coming from the previous area, it's just such a well-paced reveal. There are 2 more camera angles that are seen when you examine Forrest. I like them a lot, especially this last super wide shot. It's from up high, showing the crows attacking the player and revealing what happened to Forrest. The way it's situated, it's almost as if looking at the scene from the point of view of the birds themselves. Speaking of, let's take a closer look at the crows for a moment. While they're barely in the game, I think they're some of the coolest enemies in the classic RE series, and go hand in hand with the dogs. And like the dogs, they seem less mindless zombies and more carriers. Their only noticeable mutation being increased size, and as seen later, they aren't always aggressive from the outset and need to be provoked. As for why they attacked here, maybe they're territorial, I don't know. It works as a good and unique jump scare, so best not to read too much into it. It's theorized that after the events of this game, and during the Raccoon City outbreak, they were responsible in part for the fast and widespread nature of the outbreak, preying on smaller animals throughout the city. Now, it's commonly accepted that Forrest was killed by the crows, and yeah, I agree with that, but I don't think it's the whole truth. Forrest may have been killed by the crows, murdered if you will, but I think someone punched his ticket before they got a chance to. Look at the blood on the wall in the previous room. That's definitely Forrest's. So not only was he injured, but he was losing quite a lot of blood. He was probably on his way out as he stepped onto the East Terrace, knocking over the chair as he's quickly beset upon by the crows that were probably minding their own business on the railing. As previously mentioned, they aren't usually aggressive, so he might have set them off when he stumbled onto the terrace, likely pumped full of adrenaline and losing consciousness from the blood loss. Without digging too deeply, it's my guess that he was attacked in the U-shaped corridor and likely made for the East Terrace in a blind panic, thinking the entrance hall was too open to hide in. I'm not really basing this off anything though. There's one more thing I want to touch on with Forrest, but first, let's look at the alternate version of the East Terrace scene.
Jill! Don't scare me.
That's what I was going to say. Aren't you supposed to be going over the first floor, Barry?
Yeah, you're right. But just take a look at this. It's Forrest. Oh my God.
It's awful.
I'm going to find out what caused Forrest's death. It looks like he was killed by a crow or something. Can you look around the first floor, Jill?
Okay.
Hey, Jill. This must have been Forrest's. You don't have a weapon. Take this with you. I can't believe.
I prefer this to the original, but I never saw it myself in any playthroughs. I won't harp on about it too much, as this episode's running a bit long already, but there's one important detail we should talk about, and that's Forrest's grenade launcher. Now we know where Barry got the acid rounds from in that earlier cutscene. Why did Barry neglect to mention where he found it to Jill? And while we're on the topic, does it sound like he had known about Forrest longer than he'd let on in that last cutscene? We know Barry's working with Wesker, but that doesn't explain why he'd lie about this. Or more accurately, neglect to tell the full truth. It's not like he was behind Forrest's death or anything. As far as I can figure, he was just trying to spare Jill some heartache. That's why I reckon he was subtly directing her towards the first floor in that first cutscene. Not necessarily just because it's where the exit is, but maybe to get her away from the body. It really is hard to make anything from it all, and I know I'm reaching at times, but so far it seems that despite Barry's role in Wesker's betrayal, he's doing everything he can to watch over his teammate. Alright, that's about all I've got for this one, but before we close the book on this part of the series, I want to quickly go through and address a bunch of things I either didn't know about or forgot to mention in the earlier episodes. The black and white video that kicks off the game is actually a censored version of the original. I could have sworn I had seen it in color before, and I was right. On top of color, the original has a bit more footage, and I'd like to go over it real quick. Instead of the newspaper clippings, there are close-ups of what looks like zombies, but are probably the corpses being spoken of. Honestly, yeah, they're pretty grisly images. Get a load of Wesker's hair in the color version. There's no chance his natural hair color is cheap mustard yellow. We see the stump of Edward Dewey's hand, still clutching the gun, and a blood splatter for seemingly no reason. Here's where it gets good. I love that Joseph Frost gets a bit more screen time and doesn't just drop like a sack of potatoes. Mostly I love the practical effects. The eyeball, the explosions of blood, Frost getting torn to bits. It's awesome and it's so Resident Evil. As the shot continues on, the uncensored version has a few quick cuts to either Joseph's lifeless body or the zombie dogs tanking shots and spraying gore. It's awesome. It's at the expense of some shots of the team running away and firing their guns directly into the ground like real professionals. And I have mixed feelings about losing that. When it shows the cast of characters, we get Chris lighting a cigarette, instead of cutting to some random footage from the clip we literally just watched. I always found it weird that Chris gets this little clip show but none of the others do. It looks like some versions of the black and white intro have the cut frames in them too. My guess is it was first made black and white for censorship reasons, then some markets, like the US, felt it needed to be softened even more. Original or not, the black and white one feels right to me, as it immediately ties the game to Night of the Living Dead, a film which, directly or indirectly, influenced the game. There's also a pretty gnarly uncensored version of that iconic first zombie moment, where the zombie drops Kenneth's half-eaten head on the floor. Pretty grim stuff. I think some versions also have his body a bit more, divided. Speaking of that first zombie scene, one of my biggest regrets with the earlier episodes is not talking about that alternate first encounter. If you try and leave the dining hall a couple times, you'll get some other small cutscenes, and the zombie will eventually get tired of eating Kenneth and come get you. Also, apparently this zombie has a nickname, Taz, or the turning around zombie. I have a possible in-game excuse for why the Magnum took 3 shots to kill 1 zombie as well. On Resident Evil's page on the cutting room floor, you can see a handful of items that didn't make it into the game. One of them are the Dum Dum rounds. They were alternate ammo for the Magnum that would have done less damage than the standard rounds, and I'm guessing would have been more common than the standard rounds to boot. A bunch of people all commented on the identity of the castle in the painting in the tea room too. Neuschwanstein Castle. I hope I'm saying that right. Credit to these guys for letting me know, and if I missed anyone, I'm sorry. A few of you mentioned it in a few different places. It doesn't really fall in the overthinking wheelhouse, but I want to talk about the original version of the ceiling trap scene. Way back in Resident Evil's development, there were 4 main characters. A comic relief character named Dewey, who was very tenuously recycled into the severed hand we see in the intro cinematic. Gelza, this cyborg slab of beef who was toned down and eventually became Barry. Chris had a different name at some point, but Jill was always Jill because why mess with perfection? When these 4 were the leads, Gelza would have saved Jill from the ceiling trap by holding it up with his bare hands. There's more about this era of RE1's development that I'd like to talk about, and quite a bit of cut content stuff I wish I knew beforehand, but we'll save it for another time. There's also some extra or alternate camera angles for heaps of the rooms in the director's cut when you play advanced or arrange mode that, aside from a couple shots in the east staircase, I didn't cover. I'm not going to do that here either, but there's a project I'm cooking up now where I'll cover all that stuff in detail. And with that, we finally wrap up the first season of Overthinking Resident Evil. This has been, by far, the most successful batch of videos I've ever made for this channel, but it's felt cursed from the start. It's hard to explain, but whether it's certain episodes just taking way longer than they should have, or having to rewrite much of the scripts, or just missing details I shouldn't have missed, I feel like the entire series has been a bit of an uphill battle even to reach this level of quality. You guys have been awesome. I don't get a lot of negative feedback on these videos, so at least part of my negative feelings towards them are just me working myself up over nothing. But I do feel like I could do better. I was planning on scrapping this series entirely after this episode and starting from scratch. I don't think I'll do that though. I am scrapping my scripts and starting over from here on out, and on top of that, I'm cooking up a new project that I hope will do this game justice, but that won't be ready until at least early next year. The Overthinking DKC trilogy is about to come to a close, and once it's done, I don't want to work on anything except Resident Evil for the rest of the year, so these videos shouldn't take so long going forward. I know I say that all the time, but I'm saying it again now. As always, thank you all so much for watching. These videos take an insane amount of time to make, but it's great being able to talk with you all about this amazing game, and I don't take it for granted.